A single forged document reshaped an entire civilization's history for centuries. This is the story of the Great Forgery, a masterful lie that dictated the legacy of an ancient dynasty. You will discover exactly how a fake parchment was crafted so perfectly that it fooled experts for generations, and you will learn the stunning long-term consequences it had on everything from royal bloodlines to modern archaeology. How did one lie become embedded in the historical record, and what does it take to finally uncover such a deep-rooted deception? What does it truly mean to trust the story of the past? This dynasty stood as a colossus of its age, a realm of breathtaking cities and sophisticated courts where poets and philosophers thrived alongside powerful rulers. Its armies secured vast borders, while its engineers designed aqueducts and monuments that defied the era's technological limits. This was a golden age, a period of such profound peace and cultural output that it felt almost divinely ordained. The ruling family was not merely a line of kings, they were portrayed as living gods or their direct representatives on earth. Official chronicles, meticulously maintained by court scribes, told a story of an unbroken and pure bloodline, chosen by heaven to bring order and splendor to the world. Every new temple, every victory in battle, was another thread woven into this magnificent tapestry, reinforcing the idea that this dynasty was eternal and its legitimacy beyond question. Yet this very brilliance created a vulnerability. The legacy was so precious, so integral to the identity of the civilization, that the fear of its disruption became a powerful, unspoken force. The need to protect this perfect story, to ensure no crack ever appeared in the glorious facade, would ultimately make the entire historical record susceptible to a masterful deception. How do you challenge a history that everyone believes is written by the gods themselves? The perfect lie arrived not in whispers, but with a public declaration that shook the scholarly world. A collector, or perhaps a monk from a distant monastery, came forward with a brittle piece of parchment, proclaiming it a lost imperial decree from the dynasty's most revered founder. This was no simple list of names, it was a dramatic narrative, a secret testament filled with shocking admissions and divine prophecies that seemed to rewrite the official story. It surfaced at a moment of profound vulnerability, a time when the dynasty's modern descendants faced a succession crisis, or when a new wave of historians were actively questioning old certainties. The air was thick with the need for a definitive answer, and this document promised exactly that. The initial reaction was a storm of conflicting emotions. Veteran scholars felt a thrill of discovery mixed with deep-seated doubt, while powerful patrons at court saw in its words a tool to solidify their own political influence. The forgery was a masterpiece of deception. The parchment was artificially aged, the ink formula matched known samples, and the calligraphy was a flawless imitation of the era's style. It even contained subtle, esoteric references that only a handful of specialists would recognize, a deliberate trap for the most educated minds. These meticulous details overwhelmed the cautious voices of dissent. One by one, influential academics and court officials became its staunchest defenders, their reputations now tied to the document's authenticity. In that moment, a piece of brilliant fiction was handed the keys to the kingdom's past, setting the stage for a historical hijacking that would echo for centuries. The forger's genius lay not in perfection, but in the art of calculated imperfection. Every detail of the document was reverse-engineered to pass the most rigorous inspection. The parchment itself was not just old, it was the correct type of animal skin, scraped and prepared using a method lost for centuries. The ink was not merely faded brown, It was a precise chemical replica of the iron gall ink used by the Dynasty's scribes, complete with the subtle way it ate into the parchment over time, creating a perfect marriage of pigment and page. Even the seals pressed into wax bore the microscopic cracks and were patterns of an object handled for generations, but the true brilliance was in the text. The forger did not just use old words, they mastered the specific bureaucratic jargon of the imperial court, the flowery yet formulaic phrases that opened and closed official decrees. They understood the personal stylistic tics of the head scribes, the slight flourish on certain letters, the consistent spacing between words that acted as a scribe's unconscious signature. Most cunning of all were the intentional flaws. A small, seemingly accidental blot of ink here, a faint water stain there, even a few characters that appeared slightly smudged as if by a damp sleeve long ago. These were not mistakes, they were traps for skepticism. When a doubting scholar would find one of these minor errors, they would inevitably focus on it, dissect it, and ultimately declare it proof of the document's honest human creation. In doing so, they were psychologically disarmed, their critical guard lowered, and they would overlook the far more significant historical contradictions woven into the text's very narrative. The forger did not just create a fake object, they built an entire experience of authenticity, one that expertly manipulated the expectations and egos of the very experts tasked with exposing the truth. This was not a clumsy forgery, it was a psychological masterstroke designed to be believed. How could such a brilliant deception ever be undone? So we must ask, what drove a person to risk everything for such an elaborate lie? The motive was not born from simple greed, but from a deep, calculated need to rewrite reality itself. One compelling theory points to a succession crisis. Imagine a powerful noble family, its bloodline thinning, its right to rule suddenly challenged by a charismatic general or a rival branch of the dynasty. A legitimate claim was needed, and quickly. The forgery provided exactly that, a divine mandate from the dynasty's revered founder, specifically naming this family as the true heirs. It was a political masterstroke, transforming ambition into preordained destiny. Another possibility involves a bitter ideological war. The dynasty's official history, as it stood, may have conflicted with the rising influence of a new religious sect or philosophical school. The forged document could have been crafted to insert new doctrines into the mouth of a long-dead emperor, lending ancient and unimpeachable authority to a modern belief system. It was a way to sanctify a new orthodoxy by making it look impossibly old. In the end, the forger was filling a vacuum. Whether that void was a lack of royal blood, a lack of theological justification, or simply a lack of a story that suited the needs of the current powerful, the forgery poured in a foundation of false history to build a new present upon. The person who held the pen was not just a criminal, they were an architect of a new world order, one carefully constructed paragraph at a time. But once this new reality was set in motion, how did a single document manage to sink its roots so deep that it became indistinguishable from the truth itself? The fabricated lineage became the new truth, meticulously stitched into the official tapestry of the past. Royal genealogies, once displayed on towering stone stelae, were carefully recarved. The name of a legitimate heir, perhaps a brilliant but headstrong prince who had fallen from favor, was chiseled away, the stone smoothed over as if he had never drawn breath. In his place, the phantom ruler from the forged decree was inserted, a politically convenient ancestor who now stood as a direct link to the dynasty's divine founder. Court historians, under direct orders or simply sensing the shift in power, rewrote the chronicles. The grand narrative of the empire now included this new figure, complete with invented victories and pious deeds, his reign retroactively woven into the timeline. This was not a simple edit, it was a complete recalibration of history's compass. For generations that followed, this corrupted lineage dictated the very right to rule. A rival family, once seen as ambitious usurpers, could now point to the forged document and claim a bloodline purer than the sun itself. Their wars of conquest were no longer acts of aggression, but holy missions to reclaim their birthright. Conversely, a legitimate ruling branch was suddenly rendered illegitimate, their ancestors recast as impostors in the very story they had built. The political landscape of an entire civilization was reshaped by this single act of fiction, directing the flow of power, the fate of nations, and the lives of millions for hundreds of years. How does a civilization begin to heal from a wound inflicted not on its body, but on its memory? But the forgery's power extended far beyond the royal bloodline, reaching out to redraw the very map of the world. This document was not only a tool for legitimizing rulers, it was a deed to the earth itself. Crafted with cunning foresight, its text almost certainly contained specific clauses that granted vast, resource-rich territories to loyal noble families or powerful religious institutions. A sweeping valley known for its fertile soil, a strategic mountain pass controlling trade routes, or mines brimming with copper and gold, all could be bestowed with the stroke of a forged pen. For generations, whenever a ruler's claim to a neighboring region was challenged, they could point to this ancient decree. It was their unassailable proof, a divine right to rule written in the hand of the dynasty's founder. A border dispute was no longer a messy political squabble. It became a sacred mission to reclaim what was rightfully and historically theirs. This fabricated legal basis ignited wars and justified annexations that reshaped borders for centuries. Armies marched and cities burned, all over the ownership of land that had been gifted by a ghost. The document became a permanent weapon in geopolitical struggles, its false words dictating the fate of millions of people who lived and died on soil they were told, by the highest authority, did not belong to them. How many conflicts have been fought over a truth that was never real? The forgery did not just reshape lands and bloodlines, it reached into the soul of the civilization itself. A single line in the fabricated text could elevate a minor local shrine into a site of national pilgrimage, simply by claiming the dynasty's founder had prayed there. Suddenly, a quiet temple in a remote valley found itself flooded with wealth and royal attention. Patronage was redirected from older, perhaps more legitimate centers of worship to this new, politically convenient holy site. Its priests, once obscure, became powerful figures in the royal court, their influence built entirely upon a sentence written centuries after the fact. Theological debates were settled not by scripture but by the decree. If a rising religious sect promoted a controversial ritual, the forger could insert a passage where the great emperor himself endorsed that very practice. This gave the new ritual an ancient, unimpeachable stamp of approval, effectively silencing orthodox critics who now had to argue against the words of their most revered historical figure. The document became a weapon in spiritual wars, used to legitimize one belief system and marginalize another, all based on a historical lie. This false sacred history was then woven into the fabric of daily life. Generations of children learned songs and stories about the emperor's miraculous visit to that temple. Artisans carved scenes from the forged decree into temple walls. The people's very identity, their sense of a shared and holy past, became intertwined with a fiction. Their faith was directed, their worship channeled, and their cultural memory quietly rewritten to serve a hidden agenda. When the foundation of your spiritual world is built on sand, what happens to your faith when the ground finally shifts and the truth is revealed? The document's path to power was paved not by kings but by scholars. In hushed, book-lined studies, the most respected historians and archivists of the age gathered to examine the brittle parchment. They were the gatekeepers of history, the final arbiters of truth, and they were utterly unprepared for a deception of this caliber. Without the modern tools of carbon dating or spectral imaging, their analysis relied on the very things the forger had mastered: style and context. They pored over the calligraphy, marveling at its perfect imitation of imperial scribes. They dissected the phrasing, finding the precise bureaucratic jargon that matched other known decrees. They even pointed to the small, human imperfections, the ink blots and faint stains, as proof of its genuine age and use. One by one, the leading academic institutions of the era issued their official stamps of authentication. Their collective endorsement was a powerful shield. To question the document now was to question the entire establishment of historical scholarship. These well-meaning experts, convinced by the very evidence designed to fool them, became the forgery's most effective amplifiers. They wrote dense, authoritative papers that wove the document's claims into the mainstream historical narrative. Their textbooks, used to educate the next generation of leaders and thinkers, presented the forged lineage and its territorial grants as settled fact. The lie did not just enter the record, it was given a royal escort by the People's Society trusted to protect the truth. How does an entire field of study, dedicated to uncovering the past, become the very vehicle that perpetuates a false one? This was not a failure of intelligence, but a testament to a deception so complete it exploited the limits of contemporary knowledge. The gatekeepers, in their zeal to preserve history, had instead locked a brilliant fiction inside the vault. Yet from the very beginning, whispers of dissent cut through the chorus of acceptance. A handful of scholars studying the document in private felt a nagging unease. One might have noticed a single, peculiar word, a term for a government official that, according to all other records, did not come into common usage until at least 50 years after the founder's death. It was a ghost word, a linguistic anachronism that should not have been there, like finding a modern slang term in a Shakespearean play. Another skeptic, perhaps a provincial historian with access to older, less curated archives, could have pointed to a glaring political inconsistency. The decree named a specific family as regents, yet other, more mundane records like tax ledgers or local court scrolls from that exact period showed a completely different family wielding power in that region. The forgery's grand narrative was contradicted by the quiet, bureaucratic paperwork of everyday life. These early critics were not celebrated for their vigilance, they were ostracized. Their carefully reasoned arguments were dismissed as the envious complaints of academics who had been passed over for promotion, or as the misguided nitpicking of pedants who could not see the grand, historical forest for a few tiny, inconvenient trees. The weight of institutional consensus pressed down upon them, a social and intellectual force so powerful that conforming was far easier than questioning. To stand against the document was to stand against the entire established order of knowledge, a lonely and professionally dangerous position to hold. Yet in their stubborn refusal to accept the comfortable lie, these first doubters performed a quiet, essential service. They planted the fragile seeds of truth in barren soil, ensuring that the question of authenticity, however suppressed, never truly died. Centuries of belief began to crumble in a sterile laboratory under the cold, objective gaze of a machine. The first definitive crack in the forgery's facade came from radiocarbon dating, a technique that reads the atomic clock embedded in all organic matter. When scientists took a tiny, carefully excised sample from the document's parchment, they were not looking at the words but at the skin itself. The results were unequivocal. The animal had died centuries after the dynasty's revered founder was entombed. The very foundation of the document, the physical page that supposedly bore an ancient emperor's will, was a chronological impossibility. It was as if a letter claiming to be from Julius Caesar was written on modern printer paper. The parchment was a fraud, but the investigation did not stop there. Next came multispectral imaging, a process that uses different wavelengths of light to see what the human eye cannot. When they bathed the document in infrared and ultraviolet light, the page revealed its secrets. Beneath the elegant calligraphy of the forged text, the imaging uncovered the faint, ghostly traces of older writing that had been scraped away. The forger had used a recycled piece of genuine, but less valuable, old parchment, carefully erasing its original contents to create a blank slate for their masterpiece. They had, in effect, destroyed a real historical document to create a fake one. This erased text, perhaps a mundane monastery inventory or a merchant's contract, was the true voice from the past, silently screaming its contradiction from beneath the lie. Finally, linguistic analysts armed with vast digital databases delivered the final blow. They dissected every sentence, every turn of phrase. They found words that were like fossils in the wrong geological layer, terms that only entered the common language generations after the document was supposed to have been written. The grammar itself contained subtle, anachronistic constructions, the equivalent of using a modern slang phrase in a Shakespearean sonnet. The forger, for all their skill, could not perfectly mimic the living, evolving soul of a language they did not speak. Science had provided the unassailable proof that human skepticism, no matter how justified, could never muster on its own. It turned the document against itself, interrogating its physical substance, its hidden history, and its very voice, and in each case the lie was exposed. After so many generations, the truth was no longer a matter of scholarly debate. It was a measurable, verifiable fact. Yet this scientific victory raised a profound and unsettling new question. If the foundation is proven false, how does an entire civilization begin the painful work of dismantling the world it built upon that very stone? The quiet scholar who finally unraveled the great forgery was not a famous professor, but a meticulous archivist named Elias. He was a man who spoke more to ancient scrolls than to his colleagues, a figure so immersed in the dusty back rooms of the National Library that he seemed almost a part of its architecture. For years, Elias had felt a persistent, low hum of dissonance every time he handled a document connected to the dynasty's official history. It was not one grand error that troubled him, but 1,000 tiny, whispering inconsistencies. A land grant here that did not match a regional tax record there, a royal title used in one scroll that was absent from all others of the same period. These were the scattered pieces of a puzzle no one else believed existed. While the academic establishment celebrated the forged decree as the cornerstone of their historical understanding, Elias began his own solitary, painstaking investigation. He followed a faint paper trail of forgotten ledgers, personal letters, and provincial chronicles that had been ignored for generations, building a shadow history from the fragments the forgers had overlooked. His first, cautious publications questioning the document's timeline were met with cold silence, then with open hostility. He was called a pedant, a troublemaker, and worse, an enemy of national pride. Promotions he deserved were given to others. Colleagues he had known for years crossed the hall to avoid him. The weight of institutional opposition was immense, a wall of polished tradition against which he seemed to be throwing only tiny pebbles of fact. Yet Elias persisted, driven by a simple, unshakable conviction that history deserved honesty. He was not trying to destroy a national treasure. He was trying to save the past from a beautiful, captivating lie. His lonely quest became the crucial human thread that connected the old doubts to the new science. When the radiocarbon dating results were published, proving the parchment was a fake, it was Elias's decades of research that gave those numbers their devastating context. He could stand before the academic council and not only present the scientific proof, but also unfold his intricate map of historical contradictions, showing exactly how and where the forgery had warped the record. His life's work provided the story for the data, the human narrative that turned a laboratory result into an undeniable historical verdict. In the end, the great forgery was not defeated by a machine alone, but by the relentless integrity of one person who refused to stop asking questions. The news broke not with a whisper, but with the stark flash of camera bulbs at a packed press conference. A senior historian, his face a mask of somber resolve, stood before the world and declared the imperial decree a masterful fake. In that single, stunning announcement, a pillar of the national story was pulled away, and the entire historical edifice shuddered. Scholarly journals raced to publish the damning evidence. The cold, hard facts of radiocarbon dating and spectral imaging now laid bare for all to see. The public reaction was a profound and unsettling disorientation. It was the sensation of the solid ground beneath your feet turning to sand. Every adult who had ever opened a school textbook, every child who had memorized the songs about the great emperor's testament, had been living inside a story that was fundamentally untrue. The collective memory of a civilization had been hacked. The practical consequences were immediate and visible. Museum curators worked through the night, carefully removing the forged decree from its velvet-lined case and printing new, humble labels that read, "Modern Forgery, 19th Century." In publishing houses, there was a quiet panic as editors pulled entire print runs of history books, their pages now filled with what was essentially fiction. The process of rewriting, of untangling the real from the fabricated, had begun, and it was a monumental task. That day marked more than the exposure of a single lie. It was a public lesson in the fragility of the past. It forced everyone to confront a difficult truth, that history is not a carved stone tablet passed down from generation to generation, but a living, breathing field of study, constantly being questioned, tested, and rewritten. If this story could be a lie, what other certainties might still be waiting to fall? The academic world fractured overnight. Esteemed professors who had built their entire careers analyzing the forged decree now saw their life's work rendered meaningless. A prominent historian who had written the definitive 3-volume biography of the Phantom Emperor watched his legacy crumble into dust, his books pulled from shelves and his lectures now the subject of quiet ridicule. Academic conferences, once polite forums for scholarly agreement, became battlegrounds of fierce accusation and defensive posturing. Trust, the very currency of their profession, had been devalued. A frantic, industry-wide reassessment began as historians scrambled back to the original archives, forced to question every assumption, every timeline, every political narrative they had once considered settled fact. It was a humbling and chaotic purge, a necessary intellectual detoxification from a poison that had been sipped as nectar for generations. Beyond the hallowed halls of universities, the cultural shock was even more profound. The document was not just an academic curiosity, it was a cornerstone of national identity woven into patriotic songs, depicted in grand paintings in city halls, and cited in political speeches. To learn it was a lie felt like a personal betrayal for millions. A deep and unsettling confusion settled over the public consciousness. If this story was not true, what other pillars of their shared heritage might also be false? The very ground of their collective memory seemed to liquefy. This painful reckoning, however brutal, was the first and most essential step toward healing. It was the moment a civilization, long comforted by a beautiful lie, finally chose to open its eyes to a more complex and ultimately more honest truth. This process of historical triage became a painstaking excavation of the soul. Historians sifted through the rubble of the discredited narrative, searching for the bedrock of truth beneath. They began with the rulers themselves, re-evaluating the so-called Phantom Emperor whose entire reign was an invention. Stripping away his fabricated victories and pious decrees, they could see the actual monarch who had ruled during that time, a leader whose own genuine, if more modest, accomplishments had been completely erased to make room for the forgery. His real building projects, his actual diplomatic treaties, were now freed from the shadow of a more perfect ghost. Cultural practices were next to be scrutinized. A grand annual festival, long believed to have been mandated by the dynasty's founder, was traced back to a provincial harvest celebration that was only elevated to national status centuries later, precisely because the forged document had sanctified it. The festival was still beautiful, its traditions deeply felt, but its origin story was no longer divine, it was political. The most profound shift was in understanding the civilization's identity. The grand, unified narrative of a people led by an unbroken line of heaven-sent rulers was replaced by a more complex, more human story. The true dynasty was not a flawless monolith. It was a realm of brilliant innovation and brutal conflict, of wise leaders and incompetent ones, a real civilization that succeeded and failed on its own authentic terms, not because of a fictional divine mandate. Its genuine achievements, its stunning art, its legal codes, its architectural wonders, could finally be appreciated for what they were, human creations of extraordinary skill and ambition, no longer needing the glitter of a lie to make them shine. The legacy that remains is more fragile, but it is real, a story reclaimed from a masterful fiction. The shadowy figure who crafted this masterful lie has never stepped out from the veils of time. We know the devastating impact of their work, but the creator's own name is a blank space in the record, a ghost that haunts the edges of this entire story. Who possessed the audacity and the genius to rewrite a civilization's destiny? Historians have pieced together a gallery of plausible suspects, each with a compelling profile. The first candidate is a disgruntled high official, a man who knew the intricate rituals of the imperial court from the inside. He would have had direct access to old parchments and official scribble styles. Perhaps he was on the losing side of a political struggle, his family's influence waning, and saw the forgery as his only path to restoring their power and striking back at his rivals. Another compelling theory points to a monastic scribe, a person of immense learning and piety living in a remote monastery. Such an individual would have had the solitude, the artistic skill for perfect calligraphy, and access to a library of ancient texts needed to get every historical and linguistic detail right. His motive might not have been political power in a worldly sense, but rather a desperate, misguided attempt to protect his religious order from a hostile new ruler by providing it with an unassailable divine charter. The most chilling possibility is that it was not one person at all, but a collective effort by a powerful faction, a committee of deception where scholars, nobles, and priests pooled their knowledge to create the ultimate weapon of legitimacy. Motive, opportunity, and skill point in several directions at once. The disgruntled official had the motive and the access, but did he have the profound historical knowledge? The monastic scribe had the skill and the knowledge, but did he have a strong enough motive to risk eternal damnation? The collective faction had all the resources, but could such a large secret have been kept so perfectly for so long? Each theory fits some of the pieces, but none complete the puzzle. The search for a smoking gun, a hidden diary entry, or a deathbed confession has turned up nothing. This enduring anonymity is, in its own way, the forger's final masterpiece. they understood that the most powerful lies are those that are not tied to a single, fallible human being, but that exist as a force of nature, seeming to have no author at all. The creator vanished into the work, leaving behind a historical crime scene with a perfect, empty center. This ancient dynasty's forged decree stands as a chilling testament to a timeless human temptation. Across centuries and continents, other powerful lies have been crafted, disseminated, and believed with equally profound consequences. Consider the donation of Constantine, a document that surfaced in the 8th century. It purported to be a 4th century edict from the Roman Emperor Constantine, granting the Pope and his successors not just spiritual authority, but vast political control over Rome and the entire Western Roman Empire. For over 600 years, this text was accepted as genuine, providing a divine and legal justification for the papacy's immense temporal power, shaping the very map of medieval Europe. Then there is the far more sinister case of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, a fabricated text created in the early 20th century. It was presented as the secret minutes of a Jewish conspiracy to achieve world domination. Though repeatedly and thoroughly debunked, this malicious forgery was translated into dozens of languages, fueling hatred, pogroms, and providing a foundational lie for Nazi ideology. When we place the Great Dynasty forgery alongside these other deceptions, a disturbing pattern emerges. Each was created to fill a specific and urgent power vacuum. The donation answered a need for political legitimacy for the papacy. The protocols fed a pre-existing prejudice, offering a simple, hateful explanation for complex social problems. And our dynasty's document provided a missing link of divine right during a succession crisis. Their dissemination followed a similar path, relying on the endorsement of trusted authorities. The medieval church respected academics or powerful political factions to silence early, skeptical voices. And their eventual exposure, while devastating, almost always came from a combination of scientific advancement and the dogged persistence of individuals willing to challenge the official story. This broader view reveals a sobering truth. The manipulation of history is not a rare anomaly, but a recurring tool, a weapon used again and again to build empires, justify prejudices, and consolidate power. If this is a pattern woven into the fabric of human civilization, what does it demand of us, the inheritors of these tangled histories? As we navigate the information that shapes our own world today, our minds are wired for stories, not suspicion. This deep-seated psychological vulnerability is the reason a forgery, once endorsed, can become unshakable truth. We are all subject to confirmation bias, a mental shortcut where we instinctively seek out and favor information that confirms what we already want to believe. For the court officials who first saw the decree, it was not just a piece of parchment, it was a solution. It confirmed their political hopes, their need for a stable succession, their belief in their dynasty's divine right to rule. Any piece of evidence that supported this beautiful story was magnified, while the nagging inconsistencies were mentally filed away as insignificant anomalies. We do not evaluate information with cold, impartial logic. We often use it to build a fortress around our existing worldviews. The authority of trusted institutions acts as the lock on that fortress's door. When the leading scholars and universities of the age authenticated the document, the average person, and even most educated nobles, had little reason to question it. To doubt the decree was to doubt the entire establishment of knowledge. This reliance on expert opinion is not a sign of laziness. It is a practical necessity. We cannot be experts in everything. But this very trust creates a critical weakness. It allows a single point of failure in a respected institution to corrupt the understanding of an entire society. The most powerful force, however, is the human hunger for a good story. A complex, messy, and ambiguous historical truth is difficult to grasp and even harder to feel passionate about. But a forged decree, a secret testament from a founding father, a clear and dramatic narrative of divine will and royal destiny, that is a story you can build an identity on. It provides order, meaning, and a sense of glorious purpose. A messy truth asks difficult questions, a beautiful lie provides comforting answers. This psychological landscape is not confined to ancient libraries. Every time we encounter a piece of information online that perfectly confirms our political fears, or a viral story that seems to explain a complex crisis with a simple, villainous conspiracy, we are walking the same treacherous ground as those court scholars centuries ago. Our desire for clear narratives and our trust in digital authorities make us just as vulnerable to modern forgeries. The great Dynasty story is more than a historical mystery. It is a permanent lesson about the architecture of our own beliefs. If we understand why we are so eager to believe, we stand a chance of recognizing the next masterful lie, not when the carbon dating results come in, but before it ever gains the power to rewrite our world. The forgery's poison did not simply fade with the dynasty it was designed to deceive. Its fabricated truths were absorbed into the cultural groundwater, seeping into the foundations of empires that rose centuries later. A new ruling house seeking to legitimize its own power would point to the ancient decree as proof of a timeless principle, that a ruler's divine mandate could be transferred through historical precedent. Their legal scholars, poring over what they believed were authentic ancient texts, would cite the forged clauses in their own judgments, using a phantom emperor's words to settle real disputes over property and succession. The lie became embedded in the very language of law, its false authority echoing in courtrooms for generations. This was a historical butterfly effect in its most potent form. A single act of deception in a royal scriptorium ultimately influenced tax codes, inheritance laws, and diplomatic treaties for 1,000 years. The Phantom Emperor's fictional grant of a mountain pass could be the legal basis for a war fought with gunpowder and cannons. His invented endorsement of a temple used to justify the persecution of a rival faith with modern weapons. The forgery was a stone thrown into the pond of time, and the ripples distorted everything they touched. Artists and poets, too, became unwitting servants of the lie. Grand epics were composed celebrating the Phantom Emperor's glorious, entirely fictional reign. Painters filled vast canvases with scenes of his coronation, his battles, his pious deeds, each brushstroke giving solid, visual form to a hollow fiction. These artworks, in turn, shaped the national self-image, teaching people to take pride in a past that had never happened. A civilization's understanding of its own heroism, its piety, and its destiny was in part programmed by a masterful counterfeit. The document did not just rewrite the past, it actively designed the future, directing the flow of creativity and conflict long after its creators were dust. How many of the beautiful stories we tell ourselves are built upon such unseen and crumbling foundations? That once sacred parchment now rests under the cool, neutral glass of a museum display case. Its journey from a divine relic to a masterclass in fraud is complete. The label beside it no longer speaks of imperial decrees or heavenly mandates. Instead, it reads modern forgery, a stark and simple verdict. The object has not lost its power, but its purpose has been utterly transformed. It is no longer a window into the past, but a mirror reflecting our own capacity for deception. Visitors no longer kneel before it in reverence. They lean in with a curious, critical eye, studying the very brushstrokes and ink blots that once fooled the world. It has become one of the museum's most valuable artifacts, not for the history it purports to contain, but for the profound lesson it embodies about truth itself. Its presence in a public gallery is a permanent, silent lecture on the fallibility of sources and the necessity of doubt. School children on field trips now gather around its case, their teachers explaining how a beautiful story can sometimes be the most dangerous trap. The object that was once used to command armies and anoint kings now serves a far more humble, yet infinitely more important, role. It teaches the next generation to question, to probe, and to understand that history is not a list of facts to be memorized, but a detective story that is never fully closed. This physical document, stripped of its false authority, has ironically gained a deeper, more enduring significance as a sentinel against the very kind of deception it once represented. What other certainties in our museums, we are left to wonder, might be hiding similar secrets in plain sight? This ancient deception resonates with a terrifying clarity in our own digital world. The same psychological triggers that led an entire civilization to embrace a beautiful lie are now engineered into the very algorithms that shape our daily lives. We are living through a new golden age of forgery, one where a convincing deepfake video can be generated in minutes and a viral falsehood can circle the globe before the truth has even finished putting on its boots. The mechanisms are identical, only the tools have changed. Where a medieval forger needed aged parchment and masterful calligraphy, a modern bad actor needs a laptop and a sophisticated software subscription. The goal remains the same: to create a piece of information so perfectly tailored to our desires and biases that we willingly suspend our disbelief. The phantom emperor of the ancient decree has his direct descendants in the fabricated videos and doctored images that sway public opinion, influence elections, and incite real-world violence. We are all, in a sense, the court scholars of our own digital feeds, constantly presented with artifacts and asked to authenticate them with a mere glance. Do we possess the intellectual tools they lacked? The story of the Great Forgery is no longer just a historical mystery, it is a survival guide for the 21st century. It screams a warning across the centuries that the most dangerous lies are not the clumsy ones we easily spot, but the beautiful, convenient ones that tell us exactly what we want to hear. How do we build an immune system for our minds in an era of informational plague? The answer lies in cultivating a new kind of literacy, one that goes beyond reading and writing to include a healthy, permanent skepticism. It means learning to interrogate the source of a viral image, not just its content. It involves understanding that an emotionally resonant story is not necessarily a true one. We must become our own archivists, our own radiocarbon dating machines, questioning not just the information itself, but the platform that delivered it and the motive behind its creation. This is not about promoting cynicism, but about championing intellectual resilience. The Great Forgery was ultimately exposed because people refused to stop asking difficult questions. Our task today is to apply that same relentless curiosity to the digital decrees that flood our screens, to be the modern version of that lone, stubborn scholar who valued messy truth over a comfortable fiction. The stakes could not be higher, for the next great forgery will not gather dust in a museum. It is being written in code right now, and its target is the shared reality we all inhabit. The exposure of the forgery shattered more than just a historical narrative. It broke the implicit trust the public placed in the keepers of its past. This breach forced the entire profession of history into a painful but necessary period of self-examination. The old model, where a handful of esteemed scholars could authenticate a world-altering document based on stylistic analysis alone, was revealed as dangerously fragile. The new ethical mandate became one of radical transparency. Historians and curators could no longer present the past as a series of settled facts carved in stone. They had to learn to show their work, to expose the seams and uncertainties inherent in their field. This means a museum label today does not simply state an object's origin. It explains the evidence for that attribution. It might even note competing theories or lingering questions among experts. It invites the visitor into the process of discovery rather than presenting a final, unassailable verdict. This shift demands a new kind of courage from professionals, a willingness to publicly say we might be wrong. Rigorous, skeptical peer review is no longer an internal academic exercise. It is a vital public safeguard. The goal is to create a system where no single document, no matter how beautiful or convenient, can ever again be accepted without facing a chorus of critical, independent voices. The ethical weight carried by a curator or historian is immense. They are not merely cataloging artifacts, they are shaping a civilization's memory. The Great Forgery stands as their eternal cautionary tale, a stark reminder that their primary duty is not to protect a pleasing story, but to pursue a complex and often inconvenient truth, no matter where it leads. The process of revising history is not a swift purge, but a slow and careful rebirth. It begins in the quietest of places, in archives where historians, now armed with the certainty of the forgery, must sift through mountains of documents they thought they understood. Every chronicle, every land grant, every piece of correspondence must be reread with new, suspicious eyes. This is not simply crossing out a name. It is a fundamental retranslation of the civilization story, word by painful word. A phrase that once seemed to glorify the Phantom Emperor is now understood as a later insertion, a clumsy edit made by a scribe under orders centuries ago. The goal is to peel back the layers of the lie to find the authentic history buried beneath. This immense effort is profoundly collaborative, spanning borders and disciplines. Archaeologists return to old dig sites with new questions. A tomb once attributed to the fake ruler is re-examined, its grave goods and architectural style compared to genuinely dated sites. Linguists from across the globe convene to build vast digital libraries of the Dynasty's language, creating tools that can instantly flag anachronistic phrases that once slipped past the human eye. Chemists analyze pigment samples from disputed artworks, while physicists use ground-penetrating radar to search for foundations of buildings that the forged history claimed existed, but never actually did. It is a global project of historical triage, a meticulous assembly of a new, more honest narrative from the scattered fragments of truth. This painstaking work is the only way to truly honor the ancient dynasty. Its real legacy, built by flawed, brilliant human hands, deserves to be remembered for what it was, not for the perfect fiction that overwrote it. The foundation we build today must be solid enough to hold the weight of all our future questions. The Great Forgery scandal fundamentally rewrote the rules of history itself. It forced the entire discipline to confront its own vulnerabilities, transforming how experts approach any artifact claiming to be from the past. No longer could a document be accepted based on its appearance or the reputation of its owner. The field developed a new set of forensic tools, treating every parchment, every inscription, not as a simple record, but as a potential crime scene. Authentication became a multi-step process, a gauntlet of scientific and historical tests that any new discovery must survive. Radiocarbon dating now verifies the age of the physical material. Spectral imaging peers beneath the surface for erased texts. Linguistic analysis scans for anachronistic phrases with digital precision. This is no longer a matter of scholarly opinion. It is a systematic inquisition designed to break a lie before it can ever take root. This new rigor demanded a radical shift in how historians work. the solitary scholar in a dusty archive, while still essential, is now part of a much larger team. The historian must collaborate with chemists to understand the composition of ancient inks, with physicists to operate advanced imaging equipment, and with computer scientists to build vast databases of linguistic patterns. History became an interdisciplinary mission, recognizing that the full truth of an object cannot be unlocked by a single field of expertise. A document is no longer just its text, it is its chemistry, its physics, its DNA. This collaborative spirit created a powerful system of checks and balances, where a historian's hypothesis can be instantly verified or shattered by cold, hard data from a completely different scientific domain. Perhaps the most profound change was the cultivation of a default posture of skepticism. The scandal taught a painful but invaluable lesson, that the most dangerous documents are often the ones that perfectly confirm what we wish to be true. Today, a single source discovery that seems to rewrite history is met not with immediate celebration but with intense scrutiny. The burden of proof has shifted entirely. It is now the document that must prove its authenticity to the experts, not the experts who must prove its falsehood. This healthy doubt is the field's strongest immune response, a constant, quiet question whispered in every archive and laboratory. Is this real, or is it just another story we are desperate to believe? The legacy of the great forgery is not a broken trust but a hardened one, a field that learned to fortify its gates not with blind faith but with relentless, verified evidence. This masterful lie soon escaped the dusty confines of the archive to live a second life on the canvas and the page. Artists were among the first to be captivated, not by the forgery's falsehood, but by its human drama. One famous painting hanging in a national gallery does not depict the glorious reign of the Phantom Emperor. Instead, it captures the exact, agonizing moment the lead scholar, Elias, first understood the truth. His face is half in shadow, illuminated by a single lamp, his eyes fixed on a parchment that we now know holds a world-altering secret. The artist gives us the weight of discovery, the quiet, crushing burden of a truth that will shatter centuries of belief. It is a portrait of knowledge itself as a form of grief. Writers, too, found fertile ground in this deception. A celebrated novel reimagined the entire scandal from the perspective of the forger's apprentice, a young man torn between his loyalty to his master and his growing horror at the monumental lie they are creating. The book becomes a profound exploration of identity, asking what happens to a person when the history they were taught to revere is proven to be a carefully constructed fiction. Who are you when your past is stolen? These stories translate the cold facts of the scandal into the warm, beating heart of human experience. Documentary filmmakers have seized upon the narrative, using dramatic reenactments and cutting-edge graphics to make the forensic investigation accessible to millions. They show us the moment the multispectral imaging reveals the ghostly text beneath the forgery, a visual gasp that makes the abstract concept of palimpsest suddenly, thrillingly real. These films do not just report the event, they make us feel the shock of its unveiling. Together, these cultural interpretations form a vital echo chamber for the scandal's deepest lessons. They keep the story circulating in the public bloodstream long after the academic papers have been filed away. A person who might never read a historical journal can watch a film or read a novel and come away understanding the fragility of truth and the seductive power of a well-told lie. Art becomes the conscience of the past, a recurring dream that forces us to remember, to feel, and to question. It ensures that the great forgery is not merely a corrected error in a history book, but a permanent cautionary scar on our collective imagination. The tale of the great forgery is far more than a historical puzzle. It is a deep and lasting lesson about the very nature of truth itself, revealing how fragile our shared past can be. History is not a solid monument of facts passed down perfectly through time. It is a living conversation, a dynamic interpretation of evidence that is constantly being questioned, tested, and revised by each new generation. This story is not meant to make us cynical, but to awaken a more profound curiosity. It encourages us to look closer, to ask difficult questions, and to develop a healthy respect for the evidence. We must learn to appreciate the painstaking, often thankless work of the archivists, scientists, and scholars who dedicate their lives to uncovering the truth, piece by fragile piece. Let this incredible journey be a call to action for all of us. Engage with the stories of the past critically. Share these fascinating discoveries with others. And always look beyond the polished surface of a convenient narrative. The past is not a closed book, but a vast landscape filled with secrets waiting for a curious mind to reveal them.